Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to show you how to achieve high availability with Azure App Services. We are going to do this by deploying our applications redundantly in two Azure regions. As you can see on the screen, our application is a simple application that contains an app service and a database, the simplest application possible. To make this application highly available, we need to solve two problems. One of them is database replication, and the next one is load balancing the user requests based on the availability of these two regions. We are going to solve problem number one by configuring auto failover groups for our database. Auto failover groups will continuously replicate the database that I have in my primary region to my secondary region. And the next problem, the load balancing problem, we are going to solve that by using an Azure front door service. When it comes to load balancing on Azure, we have four potential services. We have Azure Front Door, Traffic Manager, Application Gateway, and Azure Load Balancer. And we can categorize these four load balancers into two types. Azure Front Door and Traffic Manager are global load balancers, and Application Gateway and Azure Load Balancer, these are regional load balancers. The problem that we are addressing here requires a global load balancer because we are deploying our applications in two regions. So we need a global load balancer. We can either go with Azure Traffic Manager or Azure Front Door. Azure Traffic Manager is a DNS based load balancer, and Azure Front Door is an HTTP load balancer, meaning that all your traffic will route through Azure Front Door. And I have decided to go with Azure Front Door for this demo. Now that we understand the problem that we're going to solve and how we're going to solve it, let's jump right in to the demo. First, I'm gonna create these two groups of resources on Azure. I'm gonna create an Azure SQL database and an Azure SQL Server, of course, and an app service. These two resources will be created in East US region, and that will be our primary region today. And we're going to create these two resources redundantly in West US region as well, and that is our secondary region. We're going to create all these resources with an Azure CLI script. I'm going to show you that in a minute. After creating these resources, we need to basically solve two problems. One of them is geo-replication and the next one is load balancing. For geo-replicating our databases from East US region to West US region, we're using auto failover groups, as I said. And for load balancing, we went ahead with Azure Front Door. And I'm going to create some of these services such as our web application, Azure SQL database with a CLI script to save time, and I'm going to show you how to configure auto failover groups and load balancer using Azure Portal. Now let me go into the CLI script. This is the script that we are going to use for creating the resources on Azure. As you can see, it's a pretty long script. Let me explain what it does. Even though it looks long, it's a really simple setup that we have. As you can see, I'm assigning into these variables. We have two sections here. We're going to create all the resources in the primary region, and that is East US region. And after that, I'm going to create the resources, the same resources in West US region as well. First, we're going to create a resource group. I'm going to call it ENV East US RG, and then I'm going to create an SQL server, and after that the web application. After creating all the resources in the primary region, I'm creating the resources in secondary region as well. The same thing, we're going to create a resource group, and after that an SQL server and a web application. And finally, I'm going to create the resource group, just the resource group, for creating our Azure Front Door service. As you can see, we have this script to inject these configurations to our app services. This I'm going to do later. Now let me copy all these lines of my script, and then I'm going to run the script using Azure PowerShell. As you can see, the resources are getting created. Alright, we have created all the resources on Azure. Now let me go into Azure Portal, and here we have three resource group. One of them is in East US, and the next one is in West US, as you can see here. Here I have created the resource group as well for creating our front door service. Now if I go into the resource group ENV East US, as you can see here, we have the app service, the SQL server, and also an SQL database as well. But if I go into West US region, you will see that we have the app service and SQL server, but not the SQL database. And this is because we have not enabled database replication yet. As the first step in the Azure portal, let me go ahead and create the Auto Failover group so that we'll be able to see our users database in West US region as well. For that, I'm going into the primary server, the SQL server. Here in this tab, we have failover groups. Going in, and we don't have any failover groups created. I'm going to add a new failover group. Let me call it users DB FG, something like this. As the next step, we have to select the secondary server. What this will basically do is that this will replicate all the databases in the primary server into the secondary server. Now we can set the read-write failover policy. I'm going to go ahead and keep this as automatic. If you want to learn more about failover groups, I have created a separate video on that. Please go ahead and watch it. This I'm going to keep as 1 now, and we can select the databases that we want to be replicated with this auto failover group. I'm going to select users DB and then I'm going to click create. Alright, as you can see, it is getting created. Now, if you refresh this page, it's not updating yet. If you wait for around 20 seconds, you will be able to see the auto failover group that you have created here. And as you can see, we are inside of our primary database server resource. Now, if I go into the resource groups and West US region and the secondary server, here we have failover groups as well. And as you can see, the failover group that we have created is shared between our primary server and the secondary server as well. Now, if I click on it, we can see that East US region is our primary server and West US is our secondary server. And it is replicating now. And if I go into databases within group, we can see that the database that we have in East US is online and the database that we have in West US, it's seeding now. It just turned to readable state. So basically what is happening here is that auto failover group that we have created, it is continuously replicating the data of our primary region into the secondary region. And the databases that we have in the primary region, they are both readable and writable. They are read-write. And the secondary databases, they are only readable. And one other interesting thing about failover groups is that we have these two endpoints. One of them is read-write and one of them is read-only. Even after a failover, the read-write endpoint will direct the request to the read-write database. Now, to show you that, if I try to log in to this endpoint using SSMS, let me do that now. I'm going to connect to this secondary database here. As you can see, we have users DB in the secondary database, even though we have not created in the secondary database using our script. We have created the database in the primary server. Now let me log into the primary server as well. Even though we have created and replicated the databases still does not contain any data because we have not deployed our sample application yet. Let me do that now. I have this sample application in my Visual Studio. I'm going to publish this application to both of our web applications. And if you go through the things that we have already done, we have created all these resources. We have created web application and database. And we have done the same in West US region as well, which is our secondary region. And we have configured geo-replication from East US region to West US region. And now what you're going to do is we're going to deploy a sample application to both of these web applications. For that, you can download the publish profile and add that to your Visual Studio project and publish it from there. Or if you have the application in a source control, you can just use deployment feature in App Service to do that as well. But in this case, to make the process simpler, I'm just going to upload the published profile, download it from the Azure portal. Now if I go into Azure portal and East US region and we have the App Service, I'm going to download the published profile. Alright, now I'm going into Visual Studio and import published profile. Alright, as you can see, I have imported the web application that I have deployed in East to West region. I'm going to click finish and then I'm going to publish this application. While that is getting published, let me show you one other thing. I'm going into the app settings file. Here, I have not added the actual database server in the connection string. I'm keeping a placeholder here, and if I go into the startup file, I'm replacing the database server with the value that I read from my environment variable. And now we have to set this environment variable in our two app services. For that, I'm going into the Azure portal, and then I'm going into the resource groups, and I'm going to go into the database server and the auto failover group. Alright. Now I'm going to copy the read-write listener endpoint of this auto failover group. Both of our app services will be connected to Azure SQL database through this endpoint. Now in the script that I have prepared, I'm setting these 4 values in both of our app services. First, I'm going to set the database server and the region. I'm setting the region because it is easier for us to see on the UI. Now let me run this script. Alright. Now if I go into Azure portal and if I go into the app service, as you can see, we have the database server and the region parameters set in our web apps. Now if I go back into Visual Studio and publish section, as you can see here, we have successfully published our application to East to West region. Now if I go into the resource group again and the app service and try to access it, as you can see here, our sample application works. Even though we have published our application to East to West region, we have not published the application to West to West region yet. Let me do that now. Alright, I have done that as well. As you can see here, I'm in West to West region and it is shown here as well. This will be helpful when we access the website through Azure front door. Now let's see whether this app works. I'm going to go ahead and click add user and let's try to insert an entry here. Alright, and then I'm going to West to West region. I'm going to refresh that. As you can see, the application works. Now what we have done here is that we have deployed these resources, these app services and databases in both of these regions, and we have enabled geo-replication, and then we have deployed the same application in both of these app services, and we have tested these two applications. Now we know that these applications work. The final step is configuring our load balancer, and that is Azure front door. And now let's create Azure front door service. I'm gonna create Azure front door service in load balancer resource group that we have created. I'm going in and then I'm gonna create the resource. Alright, click create. Alright, as you can see here, we can select the subscription. I'm gonna select the subscription and the resource group as well. And here, the resource group location, usually we can select a region when we create a resource on Azure, but this is a non-regional resource, a global resource, and that is why we cannot select its region. I'm going to keep this as it is. I'm going to go next into configuration. Here we can select the front ends, back ends and routing roles for our front door service. Now first I'm going to create a front end. Let me call it users app. Okay, that is available. And session affinity and web application firewall, I do not need any of these services enabled for my front door. I'm gonna add this front end. The next thing that we need to configure is the backend pool. We can add multiple backend pools, but for this demo, one backend pool is enough. I'm gonna create the backend pool. I'm gonna call it PP1 since this is a sample, and I can go ahead and add multiple backends. The backends could be any type. It could be an app service or a virtual machine or another application gateway. Since we have app services created for this demo, I'm going to go with app services, and I'm going to go with the app service that I have created in East to West region as the first backend, and these I'm going to keep as default. The priority is important because we're simulating a high availability scenario. If something goes wrong in the primary region, Azure front door should switch our traffic from our primary region to the secondary region. So we should make use of priority routing feature. For that, we can select the priority here. Since this is our primary application, I'm going to keep the priority as 1, and then I'm going to add the backend. Now I'm going to add the second backend as well. It's also an app service. I'm going to select the West US region, and I'm going to change the priority from 1 to 2 because this is our secondary deployment. I'm going to add the backend. The next thing that we need to configure is health probes. As you can see here, it is accessing the root of our application. For assessing the health of the backends, it uses head method. I'm going to change this to get, and this does the probing every 30 seconds. I'm going to change this to 1 second for this demo. As you can see, we cannot change it to 1. The minimum value that we can add here is 5. I'm going to add 5 here. Load balancing, I'm going to keep these configurations as it is. Sample size 4, successful samples required 2. I'm going to add the backend pool. Alright. The last thing that we need to configure is routing rules. I'm going to call it rule 1, and accepted traffic HTTP and HTTPS is okay, and I'm going to change this forwarding protocol to match request, and backend pool, this is okay, and URL rewrite disabled, caching disabled. I'm going to add the rule as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and create this front door service. This will usually take around 4 to 5 minutes to complete. Let's come back after that. Alright, as you can see, our front door service has been deployed successfully. Now I'm going to go in to the resource. We have some information here. The front-end host, the operational state is enabled, and total backend pools count is 1. And now if I go into front door designer, we can see the configuration that we have done earlier, and we can change them as well. Now I'm going back to the overview tab, and if I click on the front-end host, as you can see, our application is accessible through Azure frontend. And one other thing that you can notice here is that we are accessing the primary region, which is East US region, and we are accessing this through frontend, and we can still access it directly as well. As you can see, this is the primary region. And if I go into the application that we have hosted in West US region, as you can see here, it is our secondary region. It is displayed in the application itself, so it is easier for us to recognize from which backend it is serving us with. I'm going back to the front-end application. Now, one thing that we can fix here is that not making these two applications accessible directly with these URLs. For doing that, what we can do is we can go into Azure portal, and this is the app service of East US region. I'm going into networking section. As you can see, I'm in the networking section, and here we have access restriction feature. I'm going in, and here we can configure, here we can allow and deny access from different services. Basically, what I want to do here is disabling access directly to the app service from the URL like this, and only allowing access through our Azure front door service. For doing that, what I can do is I can add a rule here. Let me call it, and the action is allow, and priority, I'm going to put 100 here, and type, this is an important setting. I'm going to select service tag, and here we have a list of services on Azure, and then we can select the type of the service. Now I'm going to go with Azure front door backend, and all these settings I'm not going to touch for this demo. I'm going to add the rule here. As you can see, when we have load traffic from front door, all the other traffic sources are getting denied. Now if I try to access the East US application directly, as you can see, I cannot access the website, and this is exactly what we want. Now if I try to refresh the URL of Azure front door, as you can see, it is still working. Now I'm going to do this for West US region as well. Alright, now as you can see, the application that we have deployed in West US, it is not accessible as well. I'm going to close these two applications, and this still works. Let's try to add a new user here. the application still works. Now, if you look at the architecture that we have created all these resources through the Azure CLI script, and we have configured geo-replication so that the database will be replicated from primary region to the secondary region. And we have deployed a sample application to both of these app services to make the application highly available. And we have deployed an Azure front door service in front, and we can access the application that we have deployed in primary region, that is East US region, through our Azure front door service. Basically, we have configured everything now. Everything works. The next step is simulating a failover in this primary region. For simulating a regional failover for application, what we can do is, as the first step, we can stop the app service, or we can just delete it. And then we can do a forced failover using our auto failover group in our primary region, that is East US region. Now let me go into Azure portal. Before that, let's confirm whether this application still works. As you can see, it works, and it is serving us with our primary region, as you can see here. And now I'm going into resource groups, and since I'm going to simulate a failover in East US region, I'm going into East US region. And first we need to stop our Azure App Service. For that, I'm going into the Azure App Service, and then I'm going to click stop here. Alright, as you can see, we have successfully stopped our web application, and the next step is simulating a failover for our database. For that, I'm going into the primary server and then failover groups, and then we have the failover group that we have created. And then what we can do is, here we have the option to do a forced failover. What this will do is, this will swap these two regions. Basically, it will make our primary region, that is read-write, a readable database, and secondary, and it will make our secondary region, that is a readable database, read-write, and primary. But the cool thing here is that we don't have to change these URLs because they are always directing to read-write listener endpoint and read-only endpoints. This is a feature of Azure Auto Failover Groups. If you're using something like geo-replication, this feature will not be available there. Now, let's do this failover, and as you can see, we are getting a warning that all these TDS sessions will be disconnected, and this will cause some data loss. I don't care for this demo. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. As you can see, the forced failover is in progress. It has successfully swapped the two databases. Our secondary server became the primary, and the primary server became the secondary. And if I go into databases within group, we can see the secondary server is now online and the primary server is only readable. And now it is time for us to access our application through Azure front door and see whether that works after the failover. Alright, this is the tab. Let's try to do a refresh here. As you can see, the application is still accessible. It is serving us from West US region, and we can see the data as well. And let's see whether I can add a new user here. As you can see, I can write to the database as well. And now let me show you one other interesting thing. I'm going into SSMS. As you can see here, I have connected to our secondary database and also the primary database as well. Usually the secondary database is read-only, the primary one is read-write. But since we have done the failover, if I try to connect to our primary database, which is actually the secondary one now, and let me try to insert this new row to the users table. Now, as you can see here, we cannot insert values to this primary database. Now, you find something contradicting here, don't you? Because what I said earlier is that this endpoint will be always connecting to the read-write endpoint. And it is. And we're having this problem because we have connected to these databases through SSMS and my computer before doing the failover. And my computer has this DNS cache, and because of that, I'm still connected to the read-only database. But our application does not behave that way. That is why it still works well even after a failover. In this video, we saw how you can implement high availability architecture with Azure App Services. And along the way, we learned about Azure Auto Failover groups and Azure Front Door. If you have further questions or comments, please let me know down below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you learned something new today, and I will see you with another one. Thanks for watching.